On today's Locked On Giants podcast, roster thoughts and schedule thoughts. That's coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia, trainer, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, just a bunch of thoughts that I'm going to kind of empty out from my brain. I have thoughts on the roster, having let things settle in from the rookie mini camp and the direction that the roster is taking. So we'll talk about that in the first segment. Then I've got some schedule thoughts that I want to share with you. The schedule is coming out tomorrow night at 8:00. And of course, we will have a schedule reaction show when that schedule does drop. And then I have some last minute thoughts. So just a bunch of thoughts. We're going to get inside my mind and kind of see how I'm thinking about this Giants roster. So again, welcome on in. Let's start off with the roster thoughts. All right. Looking at the Giants 90-man roster, and I think as of this recording, they were actually at 89 players. They weren't quite at 90. So there's one more transaction they can make. I was kind of looking at the way the roster is built. And the first thing that kind of jumped out at me in looking at the roster was the wide receiver group. Specifically, going into the draft, wide receiver was a position I think a lot of people, myself included, felt that the Giants could have added to. Even though they're running it back with Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson and Darius Slayton, and even though they're going to try and still get Jalen Hyatt involved in some way, shape, or form. But you look at the receivers that the Giants have added both in free agency and also as undrafted free agents, and a very common theme amongst them is they're tall. All right. We're talking over 6'1". The Giants over the years, they've collected a lot of smallish receivers. Now they're getting some taller guys. And, the interesting thing about that is it goes back to the play of the quarterback. All right. Specifically in this case, Russell Wilson. Now, I've mentioned before, Russell Wilson is kind of on the short side for a quarterback. So the taller the receiver, the better. But there's also another reason why the Giants are trying to add skyscrapers at receiver. And that's quite simply the jump ball, the 50-50 ball, whatever you want to call it, contested catch. All right, the taller the receiver, the wider the catch range, or the bigger the radius, the catch radius, and the more likely those guys are going to come down with the ball. And, when you talk about Russell Wilson, what is his specialty? His specialty is the moon ball. So if he's putting the moon ball up, he's going to want guys to come down with that. And the only way they're going to come down with it is if they have a nice big catch radius that is bigger than the defensive backs that they are going to face in a game. So the receivers, I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out. Jalen Hyatt, that's a guy I'm still not sure where he's going to fit in. I mean, I don't think they have given up on him yet, but right now Jalen Hyatt figures to be wide receiver 4. What I would like to see happen, I don't know if this is going to happen, but what I would like to see, I'd like to see maybe Wan'Dale Robinson not get as many targets as he did last year. I think he had something like 90 targets. Maybe see if Jalen Hyatt can't take some of those targets. You have Malik Neighbors on one side, Jalen Hyatt at another. Maybe you put Darius Slayton in there some way. Now you're getting speed on the field. You're getting guys with good hands. You're getting guys who are capable of coming down with the jump ball. I just think that would help, especially with, the Giants' objective of becoming a more explosive passing offense. So that was the first thing that kind of jumped out at me regarding the construction of the roster. The running game, let's talk about that. It's been quite a while since the Giants have had a running game capable of pounding down the opposition. And part of that has been Brian Dable, for whatever the reason, seems to be more pass orientated than he does running. And I wonder if that's not because, he hasn't really had a good 1-2 punch for the Giants, since becoming the head coach. The first couple of years he had Saquon Barkley, but Barkley, he was basically the running game. And, teams would focus on Barkley. They would look to shut him down and take him out. So now, you've got a rotation that's going to include Tyrone Tracy, who's more of a finesse runner. You've got Cam Scattaboo, who's your thunder, if you will. And let's not forget about Devin Singletary. I know I've seen some reports saying, oh, the Giants should trade him or cut him. Okay, nobody's going to trade for Devin Singletary. And I don't think the Giants are going to cut him. I think they're going to go with a 3-man rotation there, or a 3-man committee, I should say, at running back, and just use that to pound down opposing defenses. And you know what? The hope is that if the Giants are able to take leads into the fourth quarter of games this coming season, maybe those guys can just, we'll see a lot of touches and drain out the clock and just, wear down the opposing defenses. So I think that's the objective they're looking to do there. Okay. The defensive line, let's talk about that. That was obviously a questionable area coming into, the offseason. Dexter Lawrence, as I have said many a time, cannot do it all by himself. So Dexter Lawrence now has some help in the form of Darius Alexander. He's got Chauncey Golston on the defensive line. He's got a bunch of other guys there. And the beauty of all these guys is they're all position flexible. So they're not just locked into one position on the defensive line. You got Alexander, who could play, backup nose if you needed him to, but basically he's a 3 tech. If you need him to play 5 tech, he probably could do a little bit of that maybe down the line. But there's just so many options now as to how you can use this defensive line depth that they have. And it's just so much deeper. And the benefit there is you can rotate guys. And as we saw with the Super Bowl with the Philadelphia Eagles, they rotated defensive linemen, and they made quite, the splash with those guys in getting after opposing quarterbacks. So really, the objective for the Giants is you want to try and get home with a pass rush with 4. You also want to, stop the run with your guys up front. I think they're in a better position now with the personnel they have to accomplish that. Okay. Speaking of pass rush, Kayvon Thibodeau, let's talk about him. Now, I still see people ask me, or on social media, people say, oh, the Giants should trade Kayvon Thibodeau. And I'm like, why? Why talk about that now? Now, if the season goes down the toilet, then maybe you think about it. But right now, I don't think you think about it. Kayvon Thibodeau, if nothing else, maybe you cut back on some of his snaps now that you have Abdul Carter on there. But, as I've said many times, think back to when the Giants had really good pass rushes. What was the characteristic of those pass rushes? They were deep. They had at least 3 to 4 deep on the pass rush. So, can Shane Bowen get them all on the field at the same time? I think he can. I think there are ways to do it. I'm curious to see how he approaches it, but I think it's a definite possibility. But I wouldn't go and start pounding the table for Kayvon Thibodeau to get traded just yet. I just don't think that makes sense. I know some people are like, well, you've got to have Abdul Carter starting over Thibodeau. Again, starting, it just means you're out on the field for the first play. It doesn't mean that, you could put your base defense out on the field for the first play and then not play your base defense the rest of the game. And I guess that counts as a starter. But I think you're going to see a mix. You're going to see Thibodeau and Carter, mixing it up. You might even see, you might even see Carter relieve Burns, who played a lot of snaps last year and did so injured. So I wouldn't be so quick to say, let's see them trade Kayvon Thibodeau, even though, he could probably bring some nice draft capital. Let's just kind of see how the season unveils. And if the season goes down the tank, then I can see maybe making a case for that. But right now, I don't think, you make a case for that to get rid of him. And then finally, I just want to talk about Jackson Dart and the fact that they have set him up in an ideal situation. And by that, I mean Jackson Dart is under absolutely no pressure to get on the field this year. Now, I know a lot of people are very anxious. It's like, let's turn the page. Russell Wilson's old. Russell Wilson's not the same guy he was, a few years ago. Jameis Winston's too much of a risk. Let's get Jackson Dart out there. Folks, you don't need to rush Jackson Dart out onto the field. Let him develop, let him acclimate. And, I have, spoiler alert, I have Jonathan Casillas coming up on tomorrow's show. And I asked Jonathan, I said, how will the Giants know when Jackson Dart is truly ready to be out there on the field? Because look, you can't simulate game snaps in practice. You can't simulate the speed. It just doesn't happen. And Jonathan's response to me was very easy, very simple. He's like, when he shows in the classroom that he knows what the protection is and where this guy's coming from and what this guy has to do in this situation, when he could do all that mental work, it's just a matter of taking it out onto the field and, executing it. So there's no need, again, for Jackson Dart to be rushed out there. Now, some people will say, well, look at what happened last year with Jaden Daniels and the Commanders. They got him out onto the field right away. Or what about Caleb Williams and the Bears? They got him out onto the field right away. Well, who did they have? Who did those two teams have as far as veteran quarterbacks that they could honestly say, all right, maybe we can win some games with these guys? The answer is nobody. The Giants, they could potentially win some games with Russell Wilson and with Jameis Winston. So it's a situation now where the Giants don't have to press and push Jackson Dart out onto the field before he is ready. All right, coming up next, some thoughts on the schedule, which comes out Wednesday night. Just basically some clues and some thoughts about primetime games and whatnot. So that's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, the NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have way more opportunities than ever to play smart and win big. If you've got a read on who's heating up, why not back it up with a same game parlay? How could a $200 in bonus bets add to the excitement if your first $5 bet hits? Think of the ways. Points, MVPs, series winners. There's so many ways to go with FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com today and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And again, coming up tomorrow, Jonathan Casillas joins me here on the podcast. We had a nice long conversation about what he saw at the rookie mini camp, just the state of the Giants, some really good stuff. I love having Jonathan on because he's just so knowledgeable and just a superhuman being, by the way. I absolutely adore him. And of course, on Wednesday night, the schedule will be out. So I will have a schedule reaction show for you on Wednesday night, which will actually be our Thursday show. So lots still coming up here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Hope you will tune in. All right, speaking of the schedule, some thoughts here and some clues as to what the schedule might look like. Now, as I record this disclaimer, it is Monday night. Some clues have already come out about the schedule and what we can expect. For example, we know that Philadelphia and Dallas have been announced as the week one Thursday night opener. That means the Giants ain't seeing Dallas and Philly in week one. There are, let's see, week 20. let's see, week 12, which is the Black Friday game, you can also rule out Philadelphia and Chicago because those two are going to square off. All right. So that would be on November 28th. Week 5, you can rule out Minnesota. Minnesota is playing Cleveland in London that week. Week 6, Denver can be ruled out. Denver is playing the Jets in London. And you could probably even rule out, week 7 for Denver if they take the bye week. All right. Now, the Chargers are playing in Brazil. I don't know who they're playing, but the Chargers, they're basically giving up a home game. The Giants are hosting the Chargers this year. So you don't worry about that. So those are some of the early clues we have towards the schedule. And and originally I was going to venture a guess as to what the Giants schedule would look like. And that's just going to be that was just so hard of an exercise. I mean, I literally spent 45 minutes trying to figure it out and it just didn't kind of work for me. And I said, you know what, let me just look at what we have to work with. Now, what I do want to talk about though, are the primetime games. Yeah, I know. You know how I feel about primetime games. I don't like them, but they're going to be on the schedule. Yes, even though the Giants last year were not very good, I don't think the Giants will get a maximum of 5. I think it is possible they will get 3. They will certainly get a Thursday night game. I can't see them not getting a Thursday night game. I think just about all the teams, if I'm not mistaken, at some point or another, get a Thursday night game. So that you can probably pencil in somewhere. If I had to take a guess on the primetime games for the Giants, you figure Dallas because, Dallas and the Giants, I mean, that's like death and taxes. You could pretty much count on that every year. So I could see the Giants game at Dallas being a primetime game. I think the Giants will probably, this would not surprise me. I think that I could see them drawing Philly in week 18. But I also would not be surprised if the Giants draw the Commanders at the end of the season because the Commanders, an up and coming team. And even though, Philly and the Giants seem to have closed out the season the last several years, I wouldn't mind seeing the Giants and the Commanders go at it because the Commanders last year kind of moved a little ahead of the Giants in terms of, closing the gap. And I think the Giants now maybe have the personnel to close the gap with the Commanders. So I think that might be a better game for me, as far as I'm concerned, for Week 18, because who knows, it might come down to a wild card at that point. If depending on what happens with Philly, if Philly doesn't dominate like they have in the past. All right, so I think that could be a primetime game. The other primetime game that I think might draw is Kansas City. All right, Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. Mahomes has never played the Giants at MetLife Stadium. Matter of fact, I think he has only faced the Giants once in his career, and that was, I want to say, in 2021, I believe that was, and that was on the road at Kansas City. So I could see Mahomes, especially if, and I hate to bring this into the equation, but I have to because it was a thing last year and the year before that. If Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce are still going strong, you just, I could see that being a factor in the decision. Shouldn't be, but I could see it being a factor. All right. But those are the 3 primetime games I think the Giants are going to draw. Now, when they're going to draw it, I'm not sure. Like I said, I started to kind of put together a schedule and then I said, you know what, I'm not getting anywhere with this. So I'm just going to, put that aside for the time being. But yeah, those are the 3. Now, if the Giants show that they're good, maybe they get some games flexed into prime time later in the season. All right. So I think the maximum is 5 games. It is a possibility. So we'll see about that. We'll see if they get, more than 3. But I do think 3 is a realistic number for the Giants because, look, even though they were bad last year, they still play in the number 1 media market. You can't leave them off a prime time. You just can't. And I just don't see that. So, all right. Final thoughts coming up right after this. So don't go anywhere. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and some final thoughts on the state of the Giants, the schedule, and just everything in between. You know, I put together an article which is going to run on New York Giants on SI. Depending on when you're watching this, maybe it hasn't even dropped already. But I got to thinking, what would be a good number of wins for this team? A lot of people say, what did the Giants have to do to show that they are on the upswing? And at the end of the day, we could talk about reducing penalties, we could talk about scoring, we could talk about keeping games close. But at the end of the day, the true measurement is going to be the number of wins. And what's a good number of wins for the Giants to show that they are on track? Folks, in having thought about it, I would say if the Giants can get at least 9 wins, which would put them, guarantee them over a 500 or better record, I think that might do the trick. Now, 9 wins might not necessarily get them into the postseason as a wild card. I don't think, they're going to be able to challenge just yet for the division, but certainly, you look at a wild card as a possibility. But I would say 9 wins. If the Giants can get to that number, and I know it's hard, given the schedule that they have, I get it. But if they could do that, then I think we could say that, that they've kind of turned the corner and are heading in the right direction. The other thing I want to talk about real quick is, we just did an article on New York Giants on SI about the most difficult opponent on the Giants 2025 schedule. Now, you would think it would be an NFC East team, but the team that is probably the sneakiest as far as being the toughest, I'm going to go with Detroit. All right. The Detroit Lions, this is a team that, basically dominated in their division last year. Now, unfortunately, they fell in their divisional playoff round, I believe, to the Commanders. All right. So that team, you look at what Dan Campbell has done with the Detroit Lions, and he has really turned that program around and done a really good job, ex-Giant Dan Campbell, by the way. So I think in terms of, the personnel the Lions have, in terms of, how they match up with the Giants, I would agree that the Detroit Lions are probably the toughest, most challenging team on the Giants schedule. Yes, ahead of the Eagles, ahead of the Cowboys, who have had the Giants number for who knows how many years now. And yes, ahead of the Kansas City Chiefs, who were the runner-ups in the Super Bowl. So overall, the Giants schedule, I'm curious to see how it plays out because and we'll talk about this when the schedule was released up as part of the reaction show, but basically sometimes you can look at a list of an opponents and you could say, oh my gosh, this is a really difficult slate. But sometimes the order in which you get the opponents can have a bearing on how a team does. So that's what I'm kind of curious to see with the Giants schedule, that amongst other things. So as always, we will bring you all that once we have it. Again, I will have a schedule reaction show for you Wednesday night. Jonathan Casillas is coming up on the show later this week. Hope you will keep it here. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. And folks, I will see you guys and gals tomorrow.